Hello everyone. We're just waiting a few minutes to officially start, so that everyone can get a chance to connect. I'm Garance from Wenabi, and I'm with Eli from Envol Vert. Yes, you can use the chat to react if you have any questions. If the sound is bad for you, or if you have any problem, use the chat. And you also have some emojis to react as well, so do not hesitate. Hello. Hello everyone. Maybe just one more minute and then we can start. People are coming. Yeah. Hello. Is the sound okay for everyone? You can write in the chat. Hello. Perfect. Emojis is fine as well. Maybe we can start with a quick overview of what we'll see during the webinar. Like, if you can just pass the, yeah, perfect. We'll start with a quick introduction from Wenabi, myself, and set the context of this webinar. And then Eli from Envol Vert will take the lead and will explain causes and effects of deforestation so that we can better understand the need to measure and reduce our forest footprint. And then we'll do the zoom on the forest footprint, why we all here together today. And we'll conclude with some solutions to minimize our impact on deforestation. Just myself, I'm Garance. I'm in charge of impact contents at Wenabi. And Wenabi, for those who don't know us yet, we are a platform for solidarity commitment. We connect NGOs and companies for the general interests. In concrete terms, what we do is enable company employees to get involved with association during their working hours through field missions, mentoring, donation, and this according to the needs of NGOs locally, of course. We've been operating since 2017, and nearly 2,000 associations and NGOs use Wenabi in France and abroad. And we operate in 56 countries, and more than 90,000 collaborators have been mobilized through the platform. And we've helped raise nearly 2 million euros for NGOs through donations. And to give you a bit of context of why we're here together with Envol Vert, it's because every 2 months at Wenabi, we focus on a cause and we highlight NGOs that work toward this cause. And in so, we create various awareness contents, webinars, and we propose field missions to company employees. And we even implement donation campaigns. And in April and in May, we are focusing on the protection of forests in France and abroad. And this is linked to Earth Day, which will take place on Saturday, the 22nd. And the aim of the webinars like this one that we organize is to encourage as many people as possible to get involved on a special cause. And today it is Eli from Envol Vert who is taking the lead and sharing his expertise on the protection of forests, and will guide you in measuring your forest footprint. So we're together for 1 hour. I leave the floor to Eli. And as I said, the chat at your disposal, so do not hesitate to use it if you have any remarks, questions, reactions, whatever.
All right. Thanks a lot. And hello, everyone. So I'm, as mentioned by Garance, I'm Eli. I've been working for Envol Vert for the past 4 years. and specifically on the forest footprint, which is a tool that we'll be seeing a bit later on, and on advocacy work in order to change companies' practices and regulation in Europe and in France. So in order to better understand why we decided to measure the forest footprint and how we can diminish our impact on worldwide forest, I would start by presenting a quick context on what are forests used for and what are the biggest threats they suffer. Then I will present quickly the methodology of the forest footprint, as well as the main raw materials that we focus on, and finally presenting some solutions that I will encourage you to take if you wish to reduce your impact. So first of all, and before entering in the subject, Envol Vert is an association which has been created in 2011. We are presented in Colombia, Peru, and France, and we aim at tackling deforestation and protecting forest and biodiversity. To do so, we have three main axes of work. The first one being the development of projects on the ground directly with the local population in order to promote some alternative to deforestation, such as agroforestry, for example, but also conservation, ecotourism, and a lot more. The second axis is sensitization, for example, with this tool or with this webinar, where you try to raise awareness in a fellow citizen. And finally, as mentioned, we also do some advocacy in order to change the global picture and the regulation that impact forest use and deforestation. So I've spoken a lot about forest, and maybe that's the first point that we should present today is forests. What are they for? What are they mainly? And the first question that I would like to ask you is how much surface or percentage of the image surface of a globe does forest represent? So it's a well-known ecosystem, but how many does it represent? So I will let you answer. Normally you will have a
you can answer directly in the chat for this question. Charlène, you can't answer. Charlène is from Envol Vert and is answering question.
Yeah, we have a spy inside the participants.
So I have 40, 30, 35, 70. Oh, she even made a joke. It's not the real number. So maybe we can reveal the number.
Yeah.
85, no.
So forests represent almost a bit more than a third of all imaged land on Earth, which is quite huge, and this is why it's really important to protect them. So it's around 4 billion hectares that is known as forest. And what is important is that forest is a big word for many ecosystems that look alike, being composed of trees of different surfaces and different height. The forest can be differentiated in various types depending on the availability, for example, of sunlight, as well as scarcity of water or presence of water, humidity, seasons, altitude, and everything else. The most known type of forests are the tropical rainforests that can be found in the Amazonian Congo Basin as well as in Southeast Asia. Then we have in our latitude here in France, for example, the temperated forest. In the northern hemisphere and a bit also in the south hemisphere, we have the boreal forest, which are well known for their coniferous species. And finally, the last one of mostly known forests are the subtropical ones. There are 5 countries that hold a bit more than 50%, or a bit more than half of all the world forests, being Russia with the highest surface of forest in the world, Brazil with the well-known Amazonian forest, then we have Canada, USA, and China. So those 5 countries are really important because when they take a decision, it impacts a lot of forest surfaces. So as we have seen, forests are really present all over the world, and they provide us with numerous services called eco-social services. They can be divided in three main parts, being ecological services, societal services, and economical services. The first one are mostly linked with the capacity of forests to participate in the global environment. So they are home to a lot of species, and they protect a lot of biodiversity. So, for example, they contain 2/3 of the terrestrial biodiversity, as well as a lot of birds and other mammals. Finally, forests also participate in climate mitigation, for example, with the storage of carbon. They are the second sink of carbon behind the ocean, so that's a second argument to protect them. Through their roots, they participate in soil protection, as well as with the tree cover and the canopy. They protect soil from erosion and droughts as well. They also participate in the water cycle through the transpiration from the leaves, as well as filtration and filtration and cleansing of the water, let's say. Regarding the societal services that they provided, they are a place of habitat for numerous population, and mostly poor population that are depending on forests to survive, as they provide energy, for example, with charcoal and other materials. They also provide food, for example, with hunting or with gathering fruits and everything else. And they are part of our day-to-day well-being through tourism and also cultural activities, depending on the region. And finally, the economical services provided by the forest is, of course, the first one, wood production with forestry that can be used in many different end products, but mostly in construction, for example, but also paper and lots more. We then differentiated with non-timber forest products. The most well-known, I would say, are the mushrooms that can be eaten, but also pharmaceutical molecules that are mostly used in, it can be cosmetics, but also pharmaceutical products. And tourism, as it can provide numerous activities, being sports, photography, and discovery adventure. And finally, a recent market that has been rising in the past decade is the compensation for carbon sink, for their capacity to stock carbon. So this is a non-exhaustive list, of course, of all the services that can be provided by forests all around the world. Now, what is quite important is that forests are present all around the globe. They help us in many ways, as we have seen, but they suffer from many threats, and we will see later what are the drivers of deforestation. But first of all, I would like to ask you how many trees are cut down per minute in the world, and you have time to answer in the chat as well.
We have 10,150, 200,000, 50,000, 300, 1,050, 10,000.
Yeah.
Lots of different answers.
Yeah, it's normal because it's quite complicated. Numerous approximation or estimation generally make the comparison with football fields per minute or stuff like that. The number behind is 2,400 trees per minute cut down in the world. It can mean a lot as well as it can mean nothing depending on where you live. But the most important thing here is that trees are cut down almost everywhere in the world, and instantly there are trees that is being cut down right now to answer different needs, of course. Which is important is the dynamics of deforestation. As we can see with this graph right here, the deforestation, which can be seen as the lowest part of the graph, has been decreasing, but we are still on a rate which is really high. between 2015 and 2020, we have been an average of 10 million hectares lost per year, which is quite enormous because it means 50 million hectares in the 5 years between 2015 and 2020. The above graph shows the forest plantation, reforestation. So there is a need to differentiate between gross deforestation and net deforestation. Gross deforestation is still really high, as 10 million hectares per year is too many, I would say. So when we have seen the services provided by the forest and what happened if we lost those forests, and what is the chain reaction that happens. So as we have seen, forest destruction means a lot. As they are carbon sink, if we destroy forests, there is an emission of greenhouse gases. So they participate in around 11% of the worldwide emission of greenhouse gases, which is quite huge. But it also means that we lost the capacity to store a lot of carbon. So there is a double impact behind deforestation. Then, as forest is home for a lot of biodiversity and animals and fauna, when there is a destruction of forest, we also put in danger some specific species. So that's why there is a huge loss of biodiversity and the risk of extinction of animals that lives in forest. So that's the last picture. And lastly, for example, with the COVID crisis, we have also seen a rise of contact between specific ecosystem or unknown ecosystem and biodiversity, which can facilitate the apparition of new zoonoses, such as the COVID, for example, but other as well. They can be transmitted to, for example, livestock sector and then transmitted to humans. So that's another risk linked with deforestation. And then, as mentioned, forests protect soil, participate in the water cycle, and when we change that, there is a risk of increasing droughts and floods, for example, increasing the impact on landscape and destroying some livelihoods and place for indigenous population. So there is a recent study that has shown that deforestation, for example, in Brazil, in indigenous territory, was much less than in non-protected or non-indigenous territory. So that's a really important aspect as well. And finally, we have seen that deforestation leads to a chain of reaction, including droughts and everything else. But there is also a really dangerous aspect, which is the feedback loops. So it means that when we reach a certain point, we do not know how much the increase of deforestation will be. So it means that when we pass a certain point, the effect and the rate of deforestation or of savanization and so on will go really quickly and skyrocket. So that's called, for example, for the Amazon, the tipping point, where there is a risk or threat that once we reach 20-25% of all the Amazon basin deforested, we transform it much more quickly into savanna, losing all biodiversity and all the services the forests provide. So now we have seen forests where they are presented, what they provide us, what the impact if we lose forest. But now the main question is, what is behind deforestation? So what is the main driver of deforestation? The main driver of deforestation is the transformation of forests into agricultural or pastoral areas. The question is, how much does this driver participate in worldwide deforestation? You can also answer in the chat.
Oh, a huge gap. 95 or 20, 80, 70, 35, 60. Lots of different answers as well. 55, 75.
Yeah. Well, the bad news is that they are all below the answer because it's 90%. So 90% of the world deforestation is linked to transformation to agricultural or pastoral areas. There is a need to differentiate between those different agriculture and objective of this deforestation, but it's a new survey done by the FAO, Food and Agricultural Organization, that evaluate this number. Other studies have shown something like 80%, so we could say they have the right answer as well. So it is important, as mentioned, to see that drivers of deforestation also can be differentiated between the geographical localization of this deforestation. So, for example, in Africa, deforestation is mostly due to shifting agriculture, which is an agriculture to answer the population needs for food directly. In other countries, such as in South America or in Southeast Asia, you can find a lot of deforestation linked with commodity-driven deforestation, which means that the commodity behind deforestation is then exported or traded on the international market. So that's not the same drivers and needs behind this deforestation. So the first driver is the agricultural expansion for crop cultures, then there is grassland for livestock, mostly the cattle sector, of course, and then there is palm oil, which is a lot present in Southeast Asia. So as mentioned, there's a lot of commodity-driven deforestation, which is linked to international trade, and this issue has been evaluated and studied by numerous organizations, such as the European Union. The number here of 16% of all deforestation linked to international exchange is sourced from a WWF report, so World Wildlife Fund. I think it's from 2020. That estimate that 16% of all the deforestation present in international exchange is arriving in Europe at the end. So it's just to show the responsibility of European countries in worldwide deforestation, which is a major information, and that's where there is this goals that arise, speaking about embodied or imported deforestation, speaking not on the deforestation in our country, but the deforestation linked with our consumption. And that's where the forest footprint arrives, because when we discover this issue and we thought about it a lot, because there is a lot of claims of the rise of forest in Europe, the rise of forest in France, the increase of surfaces, and we generally forget that through our consumption, we participate a lot in worldwide deforestation. So that's why we decided to develop this tool, which is a bit more like the carbon footprint, for example. We evaluate some 6-7 raw materials that participate in deforestation worldwide, and then we evaluate how we could, through our consumption in France, how much does it cost to the forest to consume those products. So why did we do that? Because as mentioned, there is a huge responsibility for us, and we must not turn a blind eye to it. And then because there was a lack of evaluating tool, this subject has been rising in the public knowledge, but there is still a lack of evaluation and a lack of numbers behind it. So that's why we decided to develop this tool. So the forest footprint that we developed in 2018 show a number of 352 square meters in average per French consumer. The methodology quickly is that we evaluate the amount of end products that each French consumer buy or consume each day or each week or each month, for example. And then through a life cycle assessment, we were able to evaluate the quantity of raw materials present in those end products. For example, if we consume chocolate dessert, we evaluate the amount of raw cocoa needed to create this chocolate product. Once we have the raw materials, we were able, through the average yield, to evaluate the surfaces needed to create such products. But such surface doesn't mean that it's coming from deforestation. So that's why we mitigate it with a risk, which is based on 9 criteria, to estimate the amount of deforestation present in this surface. And that's where we can make a link between the end product and an estimated deforestation, which we call the forest footprint. And when we sum everything up, we arrive at this graph showing the responsibility of each raw materials behind our forest footprint. So the objective, as it is to raise awareness, is not to have the exact number, let's say, but much more a big picture or a big overview on how we participate to deforestation. So the main aspect here is knowing that through cattle sector and through meat consumption, through soy, as we will see later, as well as palm oil, those are the three biggest deforestation drivers in the world, and that's where we participate in deforestation. Then there is the timber harvesting, which is not directly linked with deforestation, but much more to degradation, which can lead after that to permanent deforestation, but it's like a cycle. And finally, cocoa and coffee, which are raw materials that are a bit less in terms of deforestation. The responsibility of Europe and of French consumer is really high, as those products are mostly exported to European market. As you can see, we have the highest coffee consumption per habitant, which is quite important. So now we will enter in the detail of each raw materials. So when we decided to develop this tool, we focused on 6 raw materials that you have seen. The first one being the soy. So soy is a culture which is a lot present in South America, mostly in Brazil and also Argentina, but it can be produced as well in the USA, for example. In France, we have a bit of production. In Europe, and I think in India as well, there is some soy production. The main issue behind soy is that it's quite complex to evaluate this participation in deforestation, as it's hidden in the end products. So most of the soy is transformed in soy cakes and used in livestock feed. So this means that all products that originate from livestock can be linked with deforestation. So, for example, in France, the main sector which is depending on soy cakes is the poultry and dairy sector. So, for example, if we take an egg or a chicken wing or anything else linked with those sector, we can be pretty sure that it has been fed with soy cakes, and thus it has a risk of being linked with deforestation in South America or overwhere. And why is that pretty sure? Is because France is importing a lot of soy. Soy is the main raw materials that France imports. We import around 3 million tons in average per year, which is equivalent to 60 fully loaded cargo ships. So it's quite important. And when we try to evaluate the origin of the soy, we can see that 60% of the soy is linked with Brazil. As Brazil has a huge production of soy, but mostly GMO, we can be pretty sure that it's not directly used in human alimentation, but mostly in animal alimentation. So that's where meat production is linked with deforestation. And if you remember correctly the graph of the French forest footprint, you will see that soy is responsible for almost 2/3 of our forest footprint. So that's really the main driver of deforestation regarding French consumption, once again. So what we did with Envol Vert was asking people in terms of frequency, how many times do they consume such products containing soy. So for example, if we take into aspects chicken, cattle, and dairy products, how many times per week, or how many times per week do we consume each product, from no consumption to high consumption? Normally, there's a quick quiz popping up, or you can answer.
Yeah, there is a direct poll that popped up on your screen. People are starting to respond.
Yeah, and you can try to be as honest as possible.
Yeah.
We can find them in very numerous products. So for example, if I take the eggs, they are present in a lot of transformed products, such as biscuits, dessert as well. So that's where it's quite complex to evaluate the total quantity of those products that we consume. And then, as you can see on the second line, there is these written sign products with strong environmental commitments. So it's quite hard to evaluate how strong commitments are, but some certification, some companies with their own brand label are able to guarantee zero deforestation, or at least approximate or estimate that they do not participate to those deforestation.
Yeah, there is a question on the chat that asked about that. Is local or organic labels contribute to deforestation as well? So,
well, it depends. It's really there's really few labels that guarantee zero deforestation. For example, the biological one doesn't mean no deforestation, but it helps us give information on where does the soy come from, for example, in this case. So for example, in France, if we consume a biological chicken or biological eggs, it means that these eggs or this chicken hasn't been fed with soy coming from GMO in Brazil, for example. So there is a much less risk that it has participated in deforestation.
Okay. And for the responses, we have 67 votes. Thanks, everyone. And the most answered question is is average consumption of product with environmental engagement. So, yeah, average and conscious products.
Great. Well, that's a good thing because it's the higher, not so high. But what is important as well is to note that even with strong environmental commitments, if you have a high consumption of those products, the forest footprint skyrockets quickly. So it means if you have 3 or 4 of those consumption each week, even if they are committed to zero deforestation, you still have a huge risk of deforestation of 186 square meters, which is really high. But thanks for the answer. So the second raw material that we'll be evaluating is the cattle sector. So we have differentiated cattle sector to soy use, as this cattle sector is one of the main drivers of deforestation, mostly in South America, where it participates of this deforestation. It's really easy to destroy the rainforest and just put 1 or 2 cattle to graze on 1 hectare. But what is important is that the meat produced from this cattle sector in South America is mostly used locally, directly consumed by the population there. So around 80% of the meat, 75 to 80, is consumed locally, which means that the exportation of meat divided in all the countries that they export to is quite small in comparison. But one of the co-products of the cattle sector is the leather, and leather can be found in many end products, and this leather has much more chance to be exported. So, for example, leather can be found, of course, in shoes, but also in small leather goods such as bags, wallets, as well as car seats, if you have a nice car, and also in furniture, for example, sofa and anything else. So, leather can be found in many ways, and they are not consumed directly, but they participate indirectly to deforestation through the production of cattle, through the cattle sector. So once we have this information, we ask people how many times do they buy or consume, let's say, those kind of products. They are not, we know that they are not consumed directly when bought, but when you buy one, generally you can buy 2 or 3 per year, for example, and use them for 1-2 years, but then you will definitely buy some back. So the question is, in average, how many of those products in your life do you own or do you have in order to evaluate your participation in deforestation linked with the cattle sector?
So you can answer directly in the poll section. So so far mostly low consumption of products, but people are still answering. Yeah, low consumption of product with no engagement, because I think it's hard to see certification or labels on leather goods that you buy.
Yes, it's definitely hard to find those kind of certification, and there are not much present. It's also linked with the complexity of the supply chain. So leather passed through a lot of transformation, and for example, it has been found that some leather produced in Brazil was then exported to Asia and China, for example, to be transformed for the first transformation, then being exported to Italy in order to be transformed, for example, into shoes and then sold in France, which means that there is a lot of intermediaries between the end product and the producer, and thus the responsibility of the deforestation is divided into everyone. So those are the two first drivers. The third one is a well-known one, so palm oil, which is present in Southeast Asia, mostly in Indonesia and Malaysia, which hold around 90% of the world production. So palm oil is really a wonderful fruit, as it can be transformed in many ways and used in various end products once again. So the pulp of the fruits can be transformed in order to make some oil or cake, and it can be used in alimentary products such as transformed products, biscuits, and we all know, for example, Nutella, which is a well-known brand, for their spread pastes. But for the oil of the palm can also be used in biofuels. So it means that when you drive and when you use biofuels, you also participate in deforestation, which is quite complex. For instance, biofuels have been prohibited in France since 2020, which has been quite a victory for ourselves. It means that there is no more importation of palm oil linked to the consumption of biofuels in France. It's still the case in Europe, it's still the case in other countries in the world, but not anymore in France, which is quite a victory. And finally, the third type of products that can be linked with palm oil production are cosmetic products, which is linked not to the pulp of the fruits, but to the kernel. So just like almond, for example, you press them and you obtain something like milk or oil that can be used in cosmetic products directly. And once again, there is a huge diversity of cosmetic products, and thus we complexify the evaluation of this deforestation. And so yeah, that's most of all for palm oil. It has been well known, so most of the people know that it participates to deforestation, mostly due to the campaign from Greenpeace against Nutella with the well-known orangutan video. So now the question is, as always, the same one: how much of those products, the three types of products, of course, do you consume in average, so low consumption, average consumption, or high consumption, and products with strong environmental commitments. So regarding the environmental commitments, there is a known certification, which is RSPO. It is important to note that RSPO has various sub-certification and linked with the traceability of such products. So for example, there is the possibility to have segregated RSPO or mass balance RSPO, which is linked to the transformation. So fed fruit bunches are then brought to a mill in order to be transformed. And in segregated case, all the farm provide certified fruits, and thus the production from the mill is 100% certified. In the case of mass balance, there is a possibility to have, for example, 30% of non-certified product or fruits mixed with 70% of certified products. So that's an important information to have.
Yeah, and for the responses, lots of people say that they consume they have low consumption of products, mostly with no engagement, and the other ones with environmental engagement. So we have very eco-friendly participants today. Yeah, that's good.
Well, also maybe because palm oil is present in a lot of transformed products, and you might not know you are consuming it. But
True.
in any way, it's important to have this information in mind in order to maybe next time you go grocery shopping to check if there is any palm oil inside your transformed products.
I think that today lots of products show when they don't use palm oil, like they do a real focus on we don't use palm oil, and that engages people to buy this type of product.
Yeah, definitely. All right, and now for the let's say breakfast and dessert, so coffee and cocoa. In comparison, deforestation linked to those production is a bit less in terms of quantity, but the consumption and responsibility of European countries and northern countries in general is much more important. So that's why we decided also to make focus on those products. They can be present in both transformed products. Once again, mostly desserts and beverage. So coffee, mostly in forms of a drink directly, even if you can find it in, for example, in desserts such as liégeois, for those who knows. And chocolate can be found in snacks and chocolate bars, transformed M&Ms, Mars, and anything else. But once again, production of cocoa is mostly coming from West Africa, where Ivory Coast and Ghana hold up a lot of this production, around half as well. And they have participated in deforestation for the past decades. Coffee and cocoa are a bit different, as the production can take various years before bringing its full potential. So when you plant cocoa tree or coffee tree, you will need to wait at least 3 years before giving the first fruit, and the maximum yield will be attained at 7 years old, 8 years old. So deforestation linked with cocoa production goes back like 8 years before, which is important to note. And coffee comes from South America mostly, even if it's present in Africa as well, where you can find it in different way. Which is important with those two products is that there are still alternatives to their production that can be developed, such as agroforestry. So those trees are able to grow even under the shade of other trees, which means that you can still have some form of forest with the production of cocoa or coffee below it. So regarding your consumption, we put an equivalent in chocolate bars, but if you only consume some coffee, you can estimate how much do you consume per week or per month. Regarding the strong environmental commitments for those two products, so cocoa and coffee, it's quite complex to have some environmental commitments, because it's mostly linked with a dynamic of expansion. So there's a huge amount of smallholders producing coffee and cocoa. And as the price of the ton of cocoa or coffee that is bought to those producers is linked to the international market, sometimes it is below the production cost of such ton, and thus they are losing money. That's why they need to expand their territory and deforest in order to increase their production and sell more in order to survive. So what is important here is to note that environmental commitments do not mean zero deforestation, but sometimes some social commitments, such as a fixed price of buying the cocoa ton or the coffee ton, means less deforestation, which complexifies once again the methodology.
And for the answers, mostly people consume products with zero engagement and an average consumption. And we even have some people who don't consume chocolate. So that's
good.
That's good. It's odd, but that's good. So yeah, average consumption mostly.
All right. And now we can have the same evaluation for your coffee consumption.
Let's see if we have some French people here who consume a lot of coffee.
Charlene can answer for Envol Vert.
We have some no consumption, but let's give time to people to answer. So far, no consumption is 40% of people don't consume coffee.
That's good, as coffee is not so great for your health as well, so better not consume it. But
yeah,
it's quite nice.
Unfortunately. And we have some reaction in the chat. Yeah, some no consumption or high consumption. There is usually no in between.
Yeah, one or the other.
Yeah.
All right. So that's mostly our work and the a quick presentation of the evaluation we have been doing regarding raw materials. You can find more information, but I will come back on it. First question: have you been surprised, or does those answer or forest footprint result scared you, worried you?
Some people weren't surprised, but no. No, 80% of people were surprised or worried.
Right. Well, first of all, thanks, because it means that our work of raising awareness still makes sense, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank Wenabi for giving us this opportunity to make this webinar. And well, now that you know the impact of your consumption, we can pass to the last step of this presentation, is how to reduce it, or what can we do now. So first of all, as mentioned, raising awareness is our main focus, but the objective you have is maybe still learn a bit more on how does this work, what are the dynamics behind deforestation, or share this knowledge to anyone around you. So you can share, we have developed a quiz which is available in 3 languages. You can share it with family, friends, colleagues in order to raise awareness around you. This is a personal diagnosis as written in 17 questions, where we not only we enter a bit more in detail, and you will also have some flash information specifically on the raw materials that are present in the question. We also included some other materials, such as rubber, which is linked to the specific production of the EVA tree. The second step that you can do is change our practices. So as we have seen, soy is the main driver of deforestation linked with our consumption. And thus, we need altogether to diminish drastically our consumption of meat or livestock product. So it means reducing meat consumption, whether it's chicken, beef, or anything else, diminishing our consumption for us French user of cheese, of course, milk, and anything else. And of course, the lowest number of intermediaries varies, the lowest number of transformation varies, the better it is. So less transformation means also more information. So you will be must able to know where does the product come from, who owns the land, what they have done with it, and so on. So it also passes for an increase of vegetarian menu at the restaurant or local self, for example, and so on. And regarding coffee and cocoa, of course, allowing the consumption, even, well, except for those who doesn't consume those products, which is quite good. And as I've mentioned, bring environmentally strong certificate products, but also socially responsible one that guarantee just remuneration of the producer, and mostly smallholders. So in order to summarize, it means sobriety and traceability, which can be complex in sometimes, but having it in mind, now you can ask directly to those who produce and when you buy it, trying to obtain the information that is lacking. And thirdly, we all know that changing, if anyone change, it's good, but there is a need to have a global change. And this not only pass by each of us changing our consumption practices, but also having regulation, incentives from the politics in your countries for the company you have been working for. And so what we would ask you to do is to try and make the decision taker change. So first of all, raising awareness in those spheres is quite important. So sharing information, contact them in order to ask them if they know this issue, what they are doing against it, what are they planning to do once they know it, and so on. And also, if you do not wish to take it personally, you can also help the organization that are working on the subject. So in your countries or even internationally, there are well-known organizations that work on the subject. So helping them not only by, for example, doing donation, but also volunteering or just sharing on social networks information you have gained. That's already a huge push, and we would like to thank you for that, for those who already do so. And lastly, if you are an importing companies, you normally should be knowing the information where you are buying your products, but you can always rely on a diagnosis in order to specify the origin of your raw materials and how they participate in deforestation, and try changing your supply chain. So those are the four main aspects on how you can change directly, indirectly, yourself or the person you are working for, or in order to help us all together protect forests. So thank a lot for your attention. I hope it hasn't been too much boring and that you have learned some useful information. If you have any question, I will be glad to answer them.
We have still like 8 minutes, so feel free to ask question on the chat, and I will ask the question to Eli, or even if you have question for myself, do not hesitate. And it was super interesting, Eli. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
I think people are typing, so maybe we'll have some questions. There was a question that we didn't answer during the forest footprint is why don't we consider that leather is a byproduct of cattle meat production?
Well, it is taken into account. So when I say that we evaluate the life cycle analysis of a product, we then divide the responsibility of deforestation between all the co-products of a certain sector. So for example, there exists various ways of doing so. It can be through mass separation, economical separation, and anything else. If we take mass, for example, leather represents 3 to 5% of the cattle total mass, and then we can estimate that 3 to 5% of the deforestation is linked with the responsibility of leather. So that's how we take into account this difference between different co-products.
Okay, very clear. I don't know, Eli, if you have access to the chat, but everyone is saying thank you, and it was really interesting. So I agree with everyone. It was super informative and really, really great. And someone said, can we share the quiz to anyone? So feel free to share the link that I gave you in the chat to your colleagues or to your family if they want to calculate their own forest footprint. And you can measure your forest footprint in detail with the tool, with the link. So don't hesitate. And thanks so much to everyone that participated. I think it was a really great session. And thanks again, Eli. It was super great. And we were so glad to do this webinar with you. So
no problem. It was a pleasure for myself as well.
We can end the session early, 5 minutes early. Thanks everyone, and we'll send you an email just after with the details and the replay of the webinar, so you can share it to your colleague as well if you want to learn more about deforestation and how to reduce our impacts. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Bye. Bye everyone. Bye Eli.
Bye.